He walked away thinking he was making the right choice. Maybe he told himself it was for the best. Maybe he thought life without you would be easier, more exciting, less complicated. There was this little voice in his head convincing him that he needed space, that he needed to explore, that something out there was missing and he had to go find it. And in that moment, he believed it. He believed that stepping away from you would open doors to a new kind of happiness, one where he wouldn't have to consider anyone else's feelings, where he could make decisions solely for himself. So he left. At first, it feels like freedom. He goes out, spends time with his friends, throws himself into work, picks up new hobbies. He convinces himself that he made the right call because, for a while, the distractions are enough. He wakes up without having to check in, without having to send a good morning text, without needing to coordinate plans, and maybe, just maybe, he even tells himself he feels relieved. He enjoys the novelty of independence, the space to breathe, the silence that once felt impossible. But what he doesn't realize in those first few days, or maybe even weeks, is that this space he thought he needed, it's an illusion, because real love isn't suffocating. The right relationship never feels like a cage. And when someone walks away under the illusion that they're gaining freedom, they often miss the fact that they're leaving behind something priceless. But the mind has a funny way of catching up when the heart starts to feel the absence. And one day, that silence that once felt like freedom starts to feel like emptiness. He wakes up and reaches for his phone, only to remember there's no message from you waiting, no warm words, no familiar presence. And that's the moment the first seed of doubt is planted. The moments that used to be filled with you are now just moments. They don't hold the same weight, the same meaning. He goes to that coffee shop where you used to sit together for hours, and suddenly, his mind flashes back to the way you used to laugh at his terrible jokes. The scent of your perfume lingers on his hoodie that he never bothered to return. And for the first time, he doesn't want to wash it. He starts hearing your voice in his head when he's making decisions, realizing how often he used to turn to you for advice, for comfort, for reassurance. And now you're not there. He thought he would enjoy this space, but the truth is, he never understood what he was really leaving behind. He didn't just walk away from a relationship, he walked away from the person who made his life feel richer, the person who supported him, who believed in him when he doubted himself, who celebrated his wins like they were her own. He thought he wanted freedom, but he never anticipated that the freedom he was chasing would feel so lonely. He never expected to miss the small things, the way you'd send him a random text in the middle of the day just to say you were thinking about him, the way you'd challenge him to be better without ever making him feel less, the way you saw him, really saw him, in a way no one else ever did. And the real shift happens when he starts comparing, when he meets new people, when he goes on dates, when he surrounds himself with different energy, and nothing comes close to what he had with you. He realizes that conversations don't flow the same way, that inside jokes aren't built overnight, that true emotional safety is rare, and that's when the regret begins to creep in. Because it's easy to take someone for granted when they're always there. It's easy to assume love will wait, that people will wait. But the moment he sees you moving on, thriving, glowing in your own happiness, he feels it. He realizes he wasn't just another guy in your life. You were the best thing in his. And now he's the one left wondering if he made the biggest mistake of his life. So here's the truth. When someone walks away thinking the grass is greener, let them go. Because one day they'll realize the difference between temporary excitement and something truly irreplaceable. And by the time they do, you might already be gone. At first, he thinks he's fine. The world feels open. The weight of commitment is off his shoulders, and there's a sense of freedom that almost feels intoxicating. Maybe he goes out more. Maybe he distracts himself with work. Maybe he tells himself this is what he wanted all along: the space, the independence, the chance to breathe. He convinces himself that everything is as it should be, that moving on is just a matter of time. But then something shifts. It starts subtly. A song on the radio reminds him of that car ride where you were singing along, completely carefree, and he found himself laughing, watching you instead of the road. A joke someone tells doesn't land the same way because he realizes it was your kind of humor, the one only you truly understood. He scrolls through his phone absent-mindedly and stops at a conversation with you, rereading old messages, lingering on the way you used to say goodnight. He doesn't recognize it at first, that ache, that emptiness. He shrugs it off, telling himself it's just nostalgia, just habit. But then it keeps happening. The silence in his apartment feels heavier. The moments of his day that he used to share with you, sending you a meme, telling you about something ridiculous that happened, now just float in the air, unspoken, unresolved. And he starts to notice that no matter how busy he keeps himself, no matter how many distractions he fills his time with, that void doesn't go away. One evening, he reaches for his phone without thinking. He's had a tough day. Work was draining, something didn't go his way, and instinctively he wants to hear your voice. He wants to tell you about it, hear the way you'd reassure him, make him laugh, remind him that he's got this. But he stops himself because you're not there anymore. And that realization hits like a punch to the stomach. He tells himself he can call someone else. He's got friends, he's got people who care, but deep down he knows it's not the same. No one else knows him the way you did. No one else understands him on that level. He could be surrounded by a room full of people, yet still feel completely alone because the one person he truly wants to talk to isn't there. It gets worse when he sees you moving on, when you're not texting first anymore, when you're not liking his posts or checking in to see how he's doing. That's when the panic starts to creep in. Because up until now, maybe he's been telling himself that you're just giving him space, that you're waiting, that you'll always be there if he decides to come back. But now, he's not so sure. Now, for the first time, he wonders if he's lost something he can't get back. Maybe he runs into a mutual friend who casually mentions how great you're doing, how you've been out, how you seem happier. Maybe he sees a picture of you, smiling in a way he hasn't seen in a long time. And that's when it fully dawns on him. You were never the problem. The relationship wasn't suffocating. It wasn't something he needed to escape from. In fact, it was the very thing that brought depth and meaning to his life. And now, without it, he feels empty. He starts replaying things in his mind, wondering if he took it all for granted. The little things, the good morning texts, the way you listened, really listened when he spoke, the way you could sense when something was wrong before he even said a word. He thinks about how rare that kind of connection is, how not everyone just fits together like that. And that's when the real fear sets in. Because now, he doesn't just miss you. Now he's realizing he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. And the hardest part? There's no guarantee he can fix it. He can't just snap his fingers and have you waiting for him. He can't assume you'll want to take him back. And for the first time, he understands what it feels like to be on the other side, to be the one hoping, the one regretting, the one wishing he had appreciated what he had when he still had it. But by the time he realizes it, it might be too late. You know, something fascinating happens when you stop waiting for someone to realize your worth. The moment you shift your focus from them to yourself, from wondering if they'll ever come back, to simply living your life, that's when everything changes. Because here's the truth. People don't feel loss when something is still available to them. They don't truly feel your absence when you're still giving them access, still lingering, still hoping. But the second you stop making them the center of your world, that's when they start to feel it. That's when the realization sets in. At first, he may not even notice. He's caught up in his own world, thinking he has all the time in the world. Maybe he even believes you'll always be there, just waiting in the background, available whenever he chooses to return. But then, something shifts. Maybe it's a photo he sees of you, out with friends, laughing, radiant in a way he hasn't seen in a long time. Maybe it's a story he hears from a mutual friend about how well you're doing, how you're glowing, how you seem different. And suddenly there's a pang of something unexpected, a feeling he wasn't prepared for. Because deep down he assumed you would still be thinking about him, still missing him, still affected by his absence. But instead, you're thriving. And here's what really gets to him. It's not just that you're happy, it's that you're happy without him. You see, it's one thing for him to think you're sad, struggling, or still caught up in the pain of losing him. That would be easy for his ego to handle. That would reassure him that he was important, that he was irreplaceable. But when he sees that you've moved forward, when he realizes that life didn't stop for you, that's when the panic sets in. Because now he starts questioning everything. What if he wasn't as essential to your happiness as he thought? What if you were always capable of standing on your own, of finding joy beyond him? And even worse, what if someone else has stepped in to appreciate what he took for granted? That's the moment he realizes he might have made a mistake. At first, he tries to brush it off. He tells himself it's nothing, just a passing thought. But the more he tries to ignore it, the stronger it becomes. The image of you being happy, free, completely unbothered by his absence, it lingers. It follows him around, creeping into his mind when he least expects it. He catches himself checking your social media, searching for clues, looking for any sign that you still care. But instead of finding reassurance, he finds more proof that you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed him. And then the real fear sets in. Because for the first time, he sees the possibility of a future where he's no longer part of your world. A future where he's just a memory, a lesson, a past chapter in the book of your life. And that's when he realizes he doesn't like this feeling at all. So what does he do? He starts reaching out. Maybe it's subtle at first, a random message, an inside joke, a comment on something he knows will get your attention. He might not even fully understand why he's doing it, only that he feels an urgency to remind you that he still exists. But here's where you have the power, because what happens next depends entirely on you. See, the biggest mistake people make in this moment is thinking that his realization means something has changed, that just because he now sees your value, it means he's ready to treat you differently. But what you need to ask yourself is this: does his realization come from genuine change, or is it just fear? Is he reaching out because he truly understands what he lost, or is he simply reacting to the idea of losing access to you? Because there's a difference between someone wanting you back and someone not wanting to lose control over you. There's a difference between regret and real growth. And the only way you'll know the difference is by standing firm in your own power, by refusing to shrink back into the role of someone who waits for his validation. If he truly realizes your worth, he won't just reach out with breadcrumbs, hoping to keep you hooked. He won't just test the waters to see if you're still there. If he really understands what he lost, he'll show up differently. He'll take action. He'll prove through his efforts, not just his words, that he's ready to step up. And even then, it's up to you to decide whether he's earned a place in your life again. So the real question isn't whether he realizes he needs you back. The real question is, when that moment comes, will you still want him? There's a moment that changes everything. A moment where he sees something, maybe a photo, maybe a post, maybe a passing comment from a friend, and it hits him like a ton of bricks. You're not just existing without him, you're thriving. And more than that, someone else has noticed. See, at first, he thought he had time. He convinced himself that you'd still be there, waiting in some way. Maybe not openly, but emotionally. He assumed you'd still feel that connection, still have that soft spot for him, still hesitate before moving on. And yet here you are, radiating confidence, stepping into your best self and effortlessly drawing in the attention of someone new. And that's the moment it clicks, because for the first time, he sees you the way he did when he first met you. Magnetic, unapologetic, the woman he once worked to impress, the woman who held a space in his life no one else could fill. But now, there's a difference. Now someone else is seeing it too. And that shakes him to his core. Men have this funny way of processing loss. When the breakup happens, he might feel relief, space, a sense of freedom. He tells himself it's for the best, that it wasn't working, that he needs time to focus on himself. But what he doesn't realize is that this sense of freedom is borrowed time. It's not real, because while he's out there convincing himself he made the right choice, you're stepping into your power. You're reclaiming your worth. You're rediscovering what it feels like to be wanted. And then the universe does its thing. He stumbles across a picture of you and you look happier than ever. He hears from a mutual friend that you're glowing, that you're going on dates, that there's this new energy about you. And then he sees it. The comment, the guy standing just a little too close, the casual mention of a name he doesn't recognize. And suddenly he feels something he wasn't prepared for. Jealousy, maybe. But it's deeper than that. It's the gut-wrenching realization that he's not the only one who sees your value anymore. He was so used to being the one who had access to you, the one who could reach out and get a response, the one who knew the little things about you that no one else did. But now, someone else is stepping into that space. Someone else is making you laugh, making you feel special, making you feel like the prize that you are. And now, he's on the outside looking in. And here's where things get really interesting, because suddenly he starts remembering the way you used to look at him, the way you used to support him, the way you brought this effortless warmth into his life. And now it's not his anymore. That's when the panic sets in, because he realizes he took for granted what another man would cherish. See, people don't regret losing something until they realize it's actually gone. When he thought you were still emotionally tied to him, he could push away the loss. But now he's seeing what he gave up from a whole new perspective. And that's the moment he starts trying to find his way back in. It might start small, a random text, a reaction to a story, something subtle, just to see if you're still accessible, if you respond the way you used to, if there's still some part of you that's his. Because in his mind, if he can still make you smile, if he can still get your attention, then maybe, just maybe, he hasn't really lost you. But here's what he doesn't expect. You've changed. You're no longer the woman who waits for him to realize your worth. You're no longer sitting around hoping he'll come back, because while he was out there thinking he had time, you were out there growing, healing, and realizing that the right person doesn't need to lose you to know what they have. And that's the moment he realizes he needs you back. Not because you're waiting, not because you're available, but because you're not. And that's the most powerful position you can ever be in. You know, there's a moment in every man's life when the weight of what he lost finally catches up to him. At first, he's fine, maybe even relieved. The space, the quiet, it all feels like freedom. He tells himself it was the right decision. He convinces himself that he needed this, that the relationship was holding him back. But then, life does what life does best. It throws a challenge his way, a setback, a disappointment, a moment of vulnerability. And that's when he instinctively reaches for his phone to call you. It's not even a conscious decision, it's muscle memory. You were always his first call, his comfort, his person. And in that split second, he remembers how it felt to have you there, to hear your voice, to have your unwavering support, to know that no matter how tough things got, he had a place to turn to. And then it hits him. He doesn't have that anymore. He let it go. He scrolls through his contacts, fingers hovering over your name, but something stops him. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's fear. Fear that you won't pick up, fear that you've moved on, fear that he's no longer the person you'd even want to speak to. Because now the reality is staring him in the face. When he needed you most, you were there. And now that he needs you again, he's alone. This moment isn't just about missing you. It's about realizing the depth of what he had. It's about understanding, maybe for the first time, that love isn't just about passion or excitement or the highs. It's about having someone who truly sees you, who supports you, who believes in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. And when that's gone, no amount of casual distractions, no night out with friends, no scrolling through dating apps can fill that void. So he tries to push the feeling away. He tells himself it's just a phase, but then it happens again. Another long day, another moment of doubt, another night where he just needs to talk to someone who really gets him. And he realizes once again that the person who used to be there isn't. It doesn't matter how strong he thought he was or how independent he claimed to be, because when life gets real, when he's feeling lost or overwhelmed, the truth is undeniable. he misses you. He needs you. And here's the part that changes everything. He starts to wonder if you ever needed him as much as he needed you. If maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the strong, self-sufficient guy he always prided himself on being, but rather someone who was deeply supported by you in ways he never fully appreciated. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because now he sees it. The way you stood by him when he doubted himself, the way you believed in him even when he didn't show up as his best self, the way you forgave, the way you nurtured, the way you made him feel like he could take on the world just by being in it with him. And instead of cherishing that, instead of valuing what you brought to his life, he took it for granted. He thought you'd always be there. He thought your love was something constant, something that wouldn't change, no matter how much he pulled away, no matter how little effort he put in. And now here he is, realizing that love isn't a guarantee. Love is a privilege, and it's one he lost. So what does he do next? That's the part that defines him. Because he has a choice. He can stay in his pride, pretend like he's fine, keep convincing himself that he doesn't need anyone, or he can finally admit the truth to himself and to you. But here's the thing, by the time he reaches this realization, by the time he fully understands what he had with you, there's no guarantee you're still waiting. And that's the moment that really shakes him, because he doesn't just realize he needs you, he realizes he may have lost you for good. He doesn't realize it at first. It doesn't hit him all at once. At the beginning, he's too busy enjoying the space, the freedom. He tells himself this was the right decision. Or maybe, if he wasn't the one to walk away, he convinces himself that losing you wasn't that big of a deal. He distracts himself, maybe with work, maybe with friends, maybe with the next person who catches his attention. He fills the void with anything he can find, and for a while, it works. Or at least, he thinks it does. Then something shifts. Maybe it's a quiet night alone when his phone isn't buzzing like it used to. Maybe it's the sight of a couple in a coffee shop laughing over inside jokes, ones that only two people who truly get each other could have. Maybe it's the realization that the new people he's meeting don't understand him the way you did. And suddenly, the silence that once felt like freedom starts to feel like loneliness. He starts to notice the small things. The way no one texts him good morning without him initiating first. The way no one genuinely asks how his day was and truly listens. The way no one challenges him in the way you did, not to argue, but to push him to be better, to see things differently. He begins to replay moments in his head. The way you laughed at his bad jokes. The way you supported him when he doubted himself. The way you could sense when something was wrong even before he said a word. It wasn't just the love, it was the friendship, the partnership, the depth of connection that isn't easy to find again. And then the worst realization of all creeps in, the fact that he took it all for granted. At the time, he didn't see it that way. He thought you'd always be there, that you'd always care, that if he needed you, he could just come back and you'd be waiting. But time has a way of teaching painful lessons, and this one hits hard. Because he starts to see that while he was busy trying to enjoy his space, you were growing. You weren't sitting around waiting for him to figure things out. You were evolving, glowing, moving forward. And that's when the panic sets in. What if he lost something truly rare? What if someone else sees what he didn't? What if someone else is appreciating the very things he overlooked? And worse, what if you don't need him anymore? Because that's the real fear, isn't it? That the person he once thought he could return to now sees their own worth so clearly that they don't even consider going back. He wonders if he should reach out, but the thought of you responding with indifference terrifies him. The version of you he remembers, the one who always answered, who always cared, who always made him feel safe, is no longer there in the same way. You've become someone stronger, someone who doesn't chase, someone who doesn't settle. And that's when he truly realizes what he lost. Now, does that mean he deserves another chance? That depends. Because regret alone isn't enough. Realization isn't enough. What matters is whether he's willing to show up differently, whether he's willing to do the work, whether he's willing to be the person he should have been when he had you. And even then, the decision isn't his anymore, it's yours. Because when someone realizes they took you for granted, the real power isn't in their regret. It's in the fact that you no longer need their validation to know your worth. And that is the moment everything changes.